Good day. You've seen me review many games over the years, but I never actually got into my favorite games of all time. Well, that changes today. For today, we're going to be counting down my top 13 favorite games. Now, these games come across all genres, and really, the criteria I used were games that I've played for more than 20 hours. Games that were important in shaping my development as a gamer, so to speak. Games that actually got me either into a certain genre or increased interest in a certain topic. So now, let's take a look at my top 13 favorite games. Metal Slug 3 was the arcade game that I've probably played the most over time, even more so than Alien vs. Predator. This is the arcade game that really got me into the run-and-gun genre in general, and made me a lifelong fan of the Neo Geo arcade system. This is also one of the few arcade games that I actually played in real life on a consistent basis. When I think of great run-and-gun action, this is actually the first game that comes to mind, even after all those run-and-gun games I've long since played on MAME. The game itself is, in fact, run-and-gun at its finest. The controls are tight and responsive, and the levels are lush and detailed. The sound design and music are absolutely amazing, and overall it is an experience that just does not get old. I am not, as I've stated in the original review, a racing game fan. I never just could get into the genre itself. But FZero is the exception to this rule. The racing for this game just seems more faster and exciting than in others. Plus the tracks are a greater feast for the eyes than other racing game tracks. It's not just bloody boring concrete and maybe a couple of trees. They actually look futuristic and are actually, oh, I don't know, interesting. And the cars are all futuristic cover vehicles, not just, well, cars. The soundtrack is pretty bloody good, and I even have the thing on my phone and listen to it just about every time I go and exercise. And here's a track that I put on every time I go for a long sprint. In the late 90s, Pokemon was everywhere, and even the illustrious General was swept up by the ye olde Pokemania. Ostensibly, Pokemon Red was one of the very first true RPGs I ever played, and I loved that bloody game, and I would play it for hours in the kitchen because it had the best lighting of the entire house. And for those that remember the classic Game Boy, well, you had to almost sit on the surface of the goddamn sun to actually see it. Although if you sat on the surface of the sun, you'd probably burn to death before you could actually play the game, but that's neither here nor there. The gameplay for the game was, to me anyway, rather unique, as I had never played a turn-based game before. Further, I found it to be really rewarding to actually explore this entire world that, for a Game Boy game, was really quite huge. And also, I rather found it rewarding to level up my Pokemon and to eventually have it evolve into greater and greater forms. And I eventually did level my humble Bulbasaur into a giant, awesome Venusaur that could fire off solar beams like nobody's business. I always consider it more of like a Death Star shot than anything else. And this game was by far my most played Game Boy game to date, and single-handedly turned me into such a rabid Pokemaniac that I actually had to see the bloody film day one. In my time, I have played many an RTS, but none have managed to suck so much of my time away as Sins of a Solar Empire. On the surface, the game is nothing more than just a basic RTS. You collect 3 types of resources, crystal, credits, and metal, and you colonize planets. And of course, kill enemies to colonize yet more planets. Its simplicity is its greatest strength. You can really focus more on playing the game versus getting annoyed at either the interface or just the basic minutiae of resource collection. In the game, you have 3 races, TEC, Advent, and Visori. And like any RTS, they share many similarities and vary in certain specific ways. Now, my personal favorite faction is the TEC. They excel at credit collection and defense. I personally prefer turning all of my systems into fortresses and building up a small but powerful fleet. Also, I love to forgo cap ships and instead focus on building dozens of these missile ships and overwhelming my foes with waves of missiles. Sci-fi RPGs are very few and far between. Mass Effect is sort of a spiritual successor to Knights of the Old Republic and really drives home what I like to call the BioWare choice. Essentially, in this game, you have to make some very important choices that will change the course of the game, and since everything is well written and acted, all of these choices have considerable weight. The gameplay for Mass Effect is a basic third-person shooter style, and the dialogue system is fairly unique as your character is fully voiced. Now, while I do like Mass Effect a great deal, it's not all that high on the list because you really are playing more of a role than anything else. For me in RPGs, I like to lose myself in the game and not just play a character. In this game, you play as Commander Shepard, an actual character and not just sort of an avatar of yourself. And you don't really have that many options to just go off on your own, and pretty much no matter what you do, you're still at least nominally the good guy, which I find rather limiting to say the least. My favorite genre by far is the RPG genre. I like FPSs well enough, but for me a story is by far the most important element in a game. And while I rather liked Fallout 3, Fallout New Vegas is by far the superior game. Not only does the game have even greater FPS gameplay than Fallout 3, its story is by far one of the best RPG stories I have ever really encountered. The game itself really allows you to immerse yourself into the character you create. There are numerous dialogue options that change based upon what skills you choose to focus on. Further, there are numerous factions that you can ally with, or the game even gives you the choice to not join any factions and side with yourself. It is because all of these choices and immersion that this game fits in solidly at number 8. Let's face it, first-person shooters can get pretty boring after a while. Even multiplayer ones like Left 4 Dead can get boring after killing zombies over and over again. But then again, you get games like Killing Floor. They do not get boring. Killing Floor is one of those games that is just a perfect time sink. Each time you play a map, it's a bit of a different experience. The enemies might be in a different area, and the fuck-ups in this game are far more damning than, say, in L4D. Essentially, you have to play almost perfectly to make it through just about any of these bloody rounds. Further, the game takes a great deal of experimentation to master. You have a number of classes to choose from, ranging from marksman to melee, and each has significant strengths and weaknesses. This is a game where you must find what works for you. Otherwise, you will die, and die a lot. It's really this combination of a need to experiment and the overall challenge that will bring you back to this game again and again. Prior to 2010, I was not really a fan of fantasy. I found it to be rather childish, and it wasn't until a game that's actually later on this list that I actually took it seriously. Now, Oblivion here was the game that at last made me cross over into the fantasy camp. This is the game that finally made me love the concept of magic and monsters, and at last allowed me to enjoy everything that the genre had to offer. Oblivion was also one of the first games that allowed me to fully lose myself a bit in the game world itself, as it gave the player almost unparalleled freedom to do whatever the hell they wanted to do. And really, the game made you feel more like an actual adventurer than just about any of the other games on this list. You really had to do whatever you wanted to do. You could follow the main quest, or you could not. There was no real emphasis on doing anything. Pretty much like in real life, really. And some may say that the main quest in this game is a bit short, but I actually think that this is a bit more realistic. If you have this giant crisis, it's not going to take that long to solve, otherwise everyone's going to die, and once it's over, well, life does in fact go on, does it not? Lastly, it's just the fact that there's so much to do in this game that it was quite simply amazing. Not all first-person shooters are created equal. Many FPSs just have you play as one character and shoot some guys. Well, AVP dispensed with that and gave you 3 separate characters to play as with 3 different types of gameplay. This was also the game that fully piqued my interest in the AVP universe itself and led to me buying the books and later the comics. The gameplay is very engrossing, and really when you play the game, it's subtly different each time. The difficulty is tough but fair, and like with any great game, you have to really experiment to figure out what the best tactics are to use against your enemies. Multiplayer is also very enjoyable as well, and can be played for countless hours before it gets even close to dull. As stated earlier, prior to 2010, I was not a fantasy fan. I had absolutely zero interest in the genre, and there was a time when I even called it ignorant sci-fi. But then I was introduced to a certain game by a certain Timpedia, and all of that changed. Dragon Age Origins single-handedly changed my outlook on fantasy, and would become my single most played game on Steam because of it. The story for the game is quite simply amazing, engrossing, and various other positive adjectives. The voice acting is by far the best I have yet to see in just about any RPG, or game in general, really. And like in a Bethesda game, you can really lose yourself in the game, as there are so many choices to make, it's not even funny. You can really also shape your character and the world in general from the actions that you undertake. If you thought fantasy was childish and only a genre of things like Harry Potter and things of that nature, play this game and think again. I have a feeling old Harold wouldn't survive the harrowing, that's for certain. You knew this would be on here. Doom is by far my most played FPS. Hell, when I get writer's block or just get bored for a moment, I still boot it up and shoot some monsters. What can truly be said about Doom that not only I have said, but others as well? It is one of the best FPSs of all time, at least in the category of pure action and gameplay. It doesn't have a good story, nor do the objectives amount to much, but its cathartic value more than outweighs that for certain. This is a game that I've played as a kid, a teenager, and an adult. This is the game that made me an FPS madman for years, and is a game that I love even today without resorting to nostalgia goggles. There are games that are important to gaming as a whole, and then there are games that are important to individuals. This game is both of them. Ladies and gentlemen, number 2 on this list is Knights of the Old Republic. This game single-handedly got me into both Star Wars, more so than I was at the time, and also transitioned me from an FPS fan to an RPG fan. Prior to playing this game, I never knew anything like it before. I never knew Star Wars could be this awesome. And I never knew gameplay like this could even exist. The story for the game was nothing short of amazing. Sure, it was kind of send up of the plot of Episode 4, but that's not bad. That's actually really quite awesome. You can play through one of the greatest sci-fi movies of all time. And the characters were just amazing. No other word even comes close to describing them. They actually felt a bit like real people. This is one of the first games that I played where I actually felt like I was part of the story. I felt like I was less playing a game and more like watching a movie where I, the player, was the main character, thus making the game come in at number 2. I know this may piss some people off, but my number 1 game of all time is Knights of the Old Republic 2. Why? Because I've probably played this game more than any other on this list. Mainly because it just resonates with me more than just about any of the other games on this list. Like in the first game, it has stellar characterization, storytelling, and presentation. But unlike in the first game, it's just, well, superior. Knights of the Old Republic 1 was, well, idealistic. Your party members and even yourself were paragons of whatever virtue was needed at the time. Sure, you could go evil, but it was cheesy media evil. Really, everything was good in Knights of the Old Republic 1, but it wasn't really real. Nobody was really that flawed. Here, everyone is flawed, and thus more human. No one in the game is truly good or evil. Even the main villain isn't really evil, more so than just kind of, well, crazy in a way. And could even be right if they weren't, well, crazy. And really, this game resonates with me more than any other because this game feels real. Even your most dastardly villain will think that he is good in some way. And that's what this game really shows. Darth Kreia in this game isn't just a card-carrying villain. Darth Kreia is actually kind of right in some respects. The Force kind of does have way too much to do with mortal lives, and it doesn't really care who it has to step over to actually get its job done, which isn't really good in any way, shape, or form. Your quirky pilot character was originally a Sith assassin. I mean, nobody in this game can really be a paragon of any virtue because they're, well, human. Also in this game, it doesn't have just the same generic save-the-world plot. Yeah, you're trying to stop Darth Kreia, but it's not really certain if you're really saving the galaxy more so than just stopping a guy who could potentially be a greater problem. You're nowhere near as important in this game as you were in Knights of the Old Republic 1. Here, you're just a Jedi. You're just a Jedi out of tens of thousands who fought in the Mandalorian Wars, and really, that's about it. What really sets you apart from others is that despite the Jedi Council's protests, you still fought because you did what you thought was right. And then you came back and basically just gave a big fuck you to the lot of them and then left again. You didn't have an army, you didn't become a galactic hero, you just did what you thought was right and said fuck you to anyone who thought otherwise. Really, in this game, you have such a good chance to make this character yours. You could be good, you could be bad, you could be indifferent, you could help your party members with their inner demons, or you could just ignore them, or you could make them even more evil. This is a game that I just really sunk my teeth into and just sort of lost myself in. Hell, without this game, there might have been no General Lotz character at all. As this game eventually led me to create my own fanfic, where I myself was the exile and had to go through the events of KOTOR 2. The fanfic kind of got, well, outlandish at times. Like, there was a scene that took place towards the end of the game on Malachor 5, where basically it was a ripoff of the Warthog run from Halo, but anyway! And also, I kind of included Star Trek technology, and then there was like, well, I kind of patterned the final battle between myself and the evil Sith around the battle between Optimus Prime and Megatron from Transformers the movie. I will admit my fanfic got kind of cheesy, but you know what? This game still inspired that sort of cheesiness, even though this game isn't close to cheesy in the slightest. That's just how General Lotz rolls. And that's why this game comes in at number 1. And with that, those are my top 13 favorite games of all time. And so, this is General Lotz, wishing you good, Doom 2. Wishing you good, Sins of Solar Empire, again, or whatever, makes you happy.